Hello and welcome to my new tutorial. For this episode, we're gonna go back to the megacity that I did in my previous tutorials, but rather than doing a establishing shot like a wide city shot, we're gonna go down on the ground. We're gonna look at the street level and see how we can expand our world and give it a different perspective. So I wanted to kind of go back a little bit and start the project where all projects should start, and which a lot of people nevertheless forget, which is at the reference and inspiration phase. So before you start anything, for me at least, before I start a project, I kind of find an image or find something, or have an idea in my head. I remember something that I saw a long time ago or more recently, and that kind of stuck in my mind, and that serves as the starting point, the motivation, the inspiration for something I do. And of course, for this project, I kind of wanted to show this kind of street level, sci-fi, cyberpunk, whatever you want to call it. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is like stuff like Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell. And that's kind of my starting point. So in order to organize my thoughts and rather than saying like, hey, I want to do a Blade Runner like city street shot, and then just immediately doing that and jumping into, I don't know, Blender or Modo or whatever you want to use, you should actually go back and bring a bit of structure in your thinking, in your brain, and collect all the references, the inspiration, the images that kind of pop in your head. Do some image Google searching, and organize your thoughts. So I made a folder here for inspiration. I have another folder for reference, and of course for the files I work with. So I did some Google image searching just to remind myself really what the kind of mood I want to go for, and inspirational images that can serve as a starting off point. So I collected a few frames from the movie itself, from Blade Runner, which I'm sure everybody knows, to kind of like get a feeling for what I want to go for, like dark, neon lit, dirty, futuristic, that kind of stuff. Lots of street lights and interesting shapes here for parking clocks or whatever. So other images that I have here and ideas that I like to explore, of course, I love these umbrellas, and I kind of want to make an homage to that in my image. There's a couple of Sid Mead paintings that were done for the movie, to see what kind of shapes he's using, what kind of styles, to see if there's any more ideas I can bring over into my image that can serve as inspiration. Also have some of my stuff that I did for Ghost in the Shell. It's not bad to get to use your own images as inspiration, especially if, for example, clients ask, "Oh, I love what you did there and there. Please use that, or do something in that style." So it's not a bad thing to use your own images there. Some Ghost in the Shell stuff, just a lot of things in here that kind of should give me a little bit of a direction in terms of the overall style and mood I want to do. Most importantly, the inspiration images, however, are very different from the reference images. We take these as a general guide of the kind of feeling we want to convey, rather than copying this one-to-one. So let's have a look at the reference. And here I want to be a bit freer. I want to bring in some of my own interests, since this is kind of a personal project kind of thing. So I can be a bit more free in the terms of things I pick up here. So I wanted to actually look at a lot of real world, contemporary kind of city streets, mostly in Japan. Shibuya crossing here, to just get an idea of how it looks today. There's a lot of examples of lighting. very interesting lighting scenarios here. How the sun comes in. I'm not going to do like a daylight scene for this one, but nevertheless, it's interesting how to see how other photographers capture the light in order to tell a story, which we also want to do. And it doesn't matter here if this light comes from the sun or if this light comes from some artificial light source. We want to kind of pick up on the kind of storytelling ideas and the kind of ways we can use light as a way to compose and breathe life into our images. Now, your reference collection should probably look very different depending on the kind of things you like, the kind of things you want to emphasize, the kind of things you see in these images. So reference does not mean the same, does not give the same people the same kind of ideas, because everybody has their personal preference, everybody looks for something different in these images. And maybe I collect this image because I want to look at the lighting, the texture on the floor, that kind of stuff. Somebody else might look at this picture and might take cues for the kind of composition they want to do. Then a third person might look at, okay, I want to look at the fashion of this lady here, and I need that as my reference, the pattern on the back or whatever, how the skirt falls, the kind of pattern print or whatever, right? So everybody has a different kind of idea of what this reference represents for them, what they get out of it, right? Same as like here, somebody might look at, again, the lighting or even the color grading. People might look at the kind of the texture, like the roughness of how rough the texture looks up here. Other look at the signage, other look at the cars or whatever. So again, the same reference does not necessarily need to mean the same thing to everyone. But it's really what you get out of it, if it's useful, right? If this kind of lighting is really useful to you, then it's a really good reference. So for me, I mean, I'm going to look at a variety of things. I really like the messiness, but at the same time, the messy organization of this, how it's like torn apart, but it still looks kind of neat with all these plants here. For example, here I really love the design of the gate, and God knows how that can be useful later on. These kind of images can give more of like a feeling that I want to achieve. This image is a good reminder of like to bring in different levels of elevation instead of just having like a really flat looking street kind of environment. So there's a lot of different things I can see here. Here maybe I'm looking at the density of the buildings, how close they're together, and if that's something I want to look at. Here is, for example, the color contrast and the value contrast. That's really interesting to look at, the dark to light. Some images will be closer to what we're doing in the final, and something like this might not necessarily be as close, but hey, there's a dude in an umbrella, so that's pretty good. I usually throw in a lot of different things just to have them there, and then usually I make a more distinct selection. Like this is pretty cool, the kind of sky that is here. Very strong color grading. Maybe that's something we can bring in. So you see there's a lot of stuff. I like the almost like a retro tech feeling here. It's kind of juxtaposition of like cars on the ground, cars hanging from the top. This is the kind of thing that I probably want to go for more. Lots of people with umbrellas, a lot of them. And then if we pair that with something like we had in Blade Runner, like these glowing handles, I think that's going to look pretty cool. And if you darken it down so we can really see the umbrellas and all the reflections on the umbrellas. So that was an image that was probably a bit closer to what we want to do. Here, it's a pretty cool image about maybe obscuring part of it and revealing other parts. So that's, I think, a topic that I like very much as well. Shooting through a glass to see the reflection on top of what's going on behind the glass. Also very cool. Again, the revealing and hiding of certain elements is certainly something we want to explore. So these kind of images are closer again to, I think, the final mood. Something like this, I think, is pretty good in capturing the atmosphere. So let's see what else we have. This is probably a bit too tight. I think we're gonna get really into trouble in terms of like the camera placement. And I want to have like a large crowd of people rather than having this really confined space. But this gives us an interesting feel with like the drizzling rain, the lanterns, the floor. This is also could be very good key image. So as we go through these, this is pretty cool for shapes. As we go through these, what I usually want to do is, as you see, I have a lot of different things in here. What I want to do is I probably want to, I have a folder here called key images. I want to go in there and right now I have a few in here already selected that kind of serve as my images that I will use to kind of determine the style and the final look of the image. So I want to probably throw in a few more. That I think are worthwhile. Let's just collect a few here and there. These ones. So you can either do like a subfolder, so you have it like this. You can also kind of do the old school way where you take these and you drop these into like into an empty document in Photoshop, and you kind of arrange yourself like a little mood board, however you want to do that. There's no right or wrong, as long as you have, I think, a convenient way of accessing these kind of images and grouping them and having them maybe on your external monitor or somewhere else handy. Even if you want to print them out, you're free to do anything, as long as you can easily, I think, refer back to them. So that's usually how I work with reference and inspiration. You can do multiple mood boards. You can do as many as you want, but I would always try to limit the amount of images on one of these to maybe 10 or a dozen. If you have a mood board with like 500 images on it, I think that's pretty counterproductive, because your mind cannot focus. That means you haven't really made up your mind in terms of what you want to show. I think it's really a good exercise to make decisions, to say I want to go this way and not that way. I want to decide for this and against something else, so that you can kind of move decisively forward and make progress. If you have too many images, if you cannot make any decisions, then your final image will also show that, and it will look unfocused and not very distinct or unique. So that's one way of doing it, of cutting down the amount of references you look at. Another thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of people, they tend to get to a certain stage. They make quite good images, but then at some point they kind of fall apart and when it comes to details, and they say they don't know how to continue. When it comes to that, then the only answer is that you need to go back and collect a different set of references. So it's not like you just do this research in the beginning, and then you make your mood boards, and then until the end of the project you stick to that, right? And you don't look at anything else, right? That's not how it goes, actually. So let's say for the all over mood, we have a mood board, and that kind of helps us to establish the color palette, the shapes, and a lot of things that help define the image in the beginning. But then when it comes to details, when it comes to fleshing out the world and bringing the image to a finish, a lot of things then fall apart. But the only really answer is that, okay, now you need to go back and have a closer look, like, okay, how for example do these electricity poles look like? What's the ground texture like, right? What kind of difference in textures do we have on the buildings? What kind of colors? Like how does this kind of how do the electricity poles look up there? How do the signs, how are they attached to the walls? All these kind of things you need to then do more research of and look up, right? Let me see where else is there a good example. So like here, like how are these pieces connected? How do they hold up the train here, right? What kind of details are there in terms of nuts and bolts and patterns and shapes and all over feeling, right? How is this curtain here connected to that? All these kind of things you should at one point or the other take note of and figure out how to indicate or how to model or how to show in your images if it's necessary, right? Of course, if we zoomed out, right, we have a different set of details to consider, right? We're not going to be so up close, so it's less about, excuse me, it's less about nuts and bolts. It's about distribution of cars and the kind of mist in the air and the details of like where the street lights, how tall are the trees, where the cars, like what part of the car do we really see? Because we do not need to detail the car like all the way, right? We can have a fairly rough block out and then accentuate the car details where they are actually catching our eye in terms of chrome parts, the number plate and the little indicators and lamps and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to mention about reference, and it's a crucial part, I think, of the designing process that a lot of people either spend too much time on or try to get around and not do at all, and it usually shows a lot in their work. So I just wanted to make sure that we have at least mentioned this once. And once we have all this in place, we can actually jump into our 3D package and start putting something together here.